Have you ever wondered what silence sounds like when it carries more weight than applause? The room glowed in gold and crystal, filled with art collectors, influencers, legacy donors, and champagne flutes balanced like tiny trophies on manicured fingers. It was the annual Gala for Global Literacy, one of those events where elegance wears heels and egos wear smiles. Celeste Moreau stood quietly near the edge of the velvet curtain, unannounced, unbothered, observing. Across the ballroom, her former, friend-turned-public persona, Savannah Crane, lit up the stage with her usual brilliance. Blonde, camera-ready, and endlessly performative. As she raised her glass in a mock toast, her words sliced through the string quartet like a scalpel wrapped in silk. Some of us read to learn. Others just read the checks their PR teams send. The laughter was low but sharp. A few glances darted toward Celeste. She didn't flinch. No one knew she had quietly acquired the media firm behind the scenes. Not even Savannah. Not yet. Celeste simply sipped her water, always water, and watched the room pretend not to look at her. She had long since learned that true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives after dessert. Celeste Moreau hadn't always moved through rooms like she didn't owe anyone an explanation. In fact, for most of her life, she had become used to being misread, underestimated, or simply overlooked. Born in Marseille, raised in a modest townhouse with a mother who worked 3 jobs and a grandfather who taught her the discipline of stillness, Celeste's relationship with visibility had always been complicated. She was the girl who observed before she spoke, the one who memorized people's patterns before ever stepping into the rhythm herself. When she moved to New York at 23, it wasn't with the dramatic flair of someone chasing dreams. It was more like an unannounced migration. Quiet, calculated, intentional. She interned at publishing houses, cleaned Airbnb lofts at night, and studied international copyright law on weekends. While others fought to be seen, she learned how to own what others overlooked: rights, contracts, back-end systems, the quiet architecture of influence. By 32, she was no longer working for the industry. She was quietly buying parts of it, a content licensing firm in Montreal, a publishing logistics startup in Berlin, and most recently a boutique media network in Manhattan, where voices like Savannah Crane's echoed from morning talk shows to red carpet panels. Celeste didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the stage, the real one, the one no one saw. Savannah, meanwhile, was the sort of person the world never failed to notice. With her curated sincerity and well-rehearsed opinions, she knew exactly how to occupy a room. Once a classmate in a shared PR seminar at Columbia, Savannah had always been the kind of woman who asked for help with her resume, then turned in your ideas as her own. Celeste had watched quietly as Savannah's star rose through media internships, social commentary podcasts, and now daytime television. They had once exchanged holiday cards, shared books, even co-hosted a college panel on Women in Strategic Influence. But while Savannah played the part of empowerment in front of cameras, behind the scenes, her kindness often came with a time limit. Years passed. Paths drifted. Celeste didn't mind. Her work was never about being known. It was about building something that couldn't be erased when trends shifted. The decision to acquire Clarity Media Group wasn't personal. It was strategic. The firm had valuable digital archives, and their editorial arm aligned with one of Celeste's literacy initiatives in South Asia. The fact that Savannah had recently signed a high-profile hosting deal with one of their subsidiaries was, at first, a coincidence. Only later, when Celeste's legal team flagged Savannah's contract during due diligence, did the connection register. But she didn't say anything. No call, no announcement, no reveal. Instead, she accepted the final acquisition papers with a quiet nod and returned to her usual schedule: morning meditation, black coffee, legal reviews, strategic meetings, silence. The gala came just weeks later, Savannah's first major public appearance since becoming the face of Clarity's new global outreach campaign. Invitations had been sent. Speeches were prepared. Celeste had planned to send a representative in her place. But that morning, something shifted. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. Or maybe, just maybe, she wanted to hear the sound of a room discovering the truth, one breath at a time. So she stepped into her tailored navy dress, tied her hair into a low knot, and attended. Not to be seen. But to watch what happens when the past forgets it, owes you something, and the future arrives anyway. Years before the gala and the power shift no one saw coming, Celeste Moreau and Savannah Crane had walked the same campus pathways, sat in the same graduate-level seminars, and smiled for the same student newsletter photos. From the outside, they looked like friends, two young women with ambition in their eyes and notebooks full of strategy. But even back then, there had always been an unspoken current beneath their interactions, something quieter than rivalry, but sharper than indifference. They met during an elective on media influence and narrative construction. Celeste, with her quiet confidence and sharp mind, often held back in discussions, choosing instead to listen, to watch how people postured, who interrupted whom, who spoke without saying much. Savannah, on the other hand, thrived in performance. She always had the first hand in the air, the loudest laugh, the most polished group presentations. She called Celeste mysterious with a smirk, the way people do when they can't read you and therefore assume you're hiding something. What began as mutual tolerance turned into a kind of situational closeness. Group projects, late-night study sessions, shared cab rides home from internships. Savannah confided in Celeste about her media aspirations. Celeste, though more reserved, once shared her dream of creating equitable access to education through storytelling platforms. Savannah called it noble and added, "But you'll need a public face for that. You're too behind the scenes." Celeste remembered that line. Not because it hurt, but because it was so perfectly Savannah. Wrapped in flattery, edged with dismissal. The final semester was when the rupture quietly began. Celeste had developed a capstone project focused on licensing community-created literacy tools in underrepresented regions. Savannah offered to help pitch it for a grant competition. What Celeste didn't anticipate was seeing a modified version of her proposal appear weeks later under Savannah's name, dressed up in glossier language but stripped of its core purpose. It won second place. Savannah beamed in the photos. Celeste never said a word. She didn't confront her. She didn't call her out. She simply took the loss, noted the lesson, and adjusted her path. That was the year Celeste stopped sharing drafts, stopped collaborating without contracts, and stopped assuming proximity meant trust. After graduation, they drifted the way people often do when life forks in silence. Savannah went on to gain visibility fast, first as a digital strategist for a major women's magazine, then as a contributor to morning news segments. She mastered the art of sound bites and soft politics, positioning herself as a voice of empowerment, always camera-ready, always in motion. Celeste disappeared from public view entirely. She moved to Singapore for 2 years, studied nonlinear storytelling models, consulted on international literacy programs. She slept little, read constantly, and built her first software licensing model in a co-working space above a traditional bakery. By the time she returned to New York, she had formed 3 entities under the umbrella of Moreau Impact Holdings, each one carefully structured, legally shielded, and financially self-sustaining. When Savannah began appearing as the face of campaigns advocating for educational access, Celeste didn't feel anger. What she felt was something colder, something more distant. Not betrayal, expectation confirmed. What Savannah had always done was absorb narratives. She had a gift for echoing the right values at the right time, but they were never hers. They were borrowed, repackaged, monetized. The gala was announced a month after Celeste's firm initiated the acquisition of Clarity Media Group. The irony didn't escape her, nor did the opportunity. Savannah was to co-host the event as part of Clarity's global literacy initiative. The same cause Celeste had dedicated over a decade to, only now her name was nowhere on the invitation, but she didn't need it to be. Celeste understood something Savannah never had. Ownership was louder than exposure. And sometimes, being mistaken for a guest in your own empire was the most strategic position of all. As she stood in front of her mirror that night before the gala, applying a muted shade of lipstick and smoothing down the collar of her minimalist dress, a thought crossed her mind. Not bitter, not proud, just clear. She didn't need Savannah to remember who she was. She needed her to realize who she had become. The ballroom at the Langston Hotel shimmered with theatrical elegance. Velvet drapes framed the windows like stage curtains, and golden uplighting kissed every marble column. Guests floated in clusters, exchanging the kind of curated conversation that fills these spaces, half networking, half performance. Celeste Moreau arrived just past 8, precisely timed to avoid the red carpet, but early enough to be noticed by those trained to see influence, even when it doesn't wear a name tag. She moved through the room quietly, like a well-written line, measured, polished, easy to underestimate. Savannah Crane, on the other hand, was everywhere. Photographers rotated around her like satellites. Her laughter rose above the low music, and her words spilled like champagne, light, effervescent, practiced. She wore a sequined champagne gown that shimmered when she turned under the chandeliers. To the untrained eye, she was the evening's crown jewel. But Celeste saw the small giveaways, the way Savannah checked her reflection in every polished surface, how her smile faltered for a split second when the CEO of Clarity didn't remember her name. Celeste watched from the perimeter, sipping her drink and saying little. She wasn't there to steal attention. She was there to see what power looked like when it forgot where it came from. The incident happened during the main dinner program. The MC welcomed Savannah to the stage as a champion of literacy and modern leadership, and she took the mic with the ease of someone used to being heard. She began with the usual notes, how honored she was, how important literacy was to her, how this night reminded her of the many incredible women she had met along the way. Then she paused, a shift in her tone. In fact, she said, scanning the room with a performative twinkle in her eye, one of my earliest collaborators is here tonight. A brilliant woman I met back in grad school. So brilliant, she could disappear into any room. A few polite chuckles. She once told me she wanted to change the world through silent systems. And I told her, darling, the world doesn't reward silence. The world doesn't even notice it. Laughter. Louder this time. Heads turned. Eyes found Celeste. Someone at her table made a subtle gesture of recognition, then awkwardly looked away. Savannah smiled, the way people smile when they know they've won the moment. But here she is, Savannah continued, lifting her glass toward Seayard, the far end of the room, still silent, still watching. Some things never change. There it was. The insult cloaked in nostalgia. The dismissal wrapped in a toast, the kind of moment that might go unnoticed by many, but hits with surgical precision to the one it's meant for. Celeste didn't react. She simply placed her glass on the linen-draped table, folded her napkin, with care, and nodded once at the server who offered her the next course. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, not shaken, just aware. She had been here before, in different forms, across different tables. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them keep thinking power has to be loud. Because what Savannah didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that Celeste had closed on Clarity Media Group just 12 hours earlier. The ink was dry. The board had been restructured. And Savannah's contract, her show, her platform, All now existed under Celeste's quiet authority. It was already done. There would be no dramatic reveal, no public confrontation. That wasn't Celeste's way. Her power didn't need applause. It only needed time, and time, she knew, would do the rest. The drive home from the gala was silent, not in the absence of sound sense, but in the way a mind goes quiet when it's processing something deeper than anger. Celeste sat in the back of the town car, watching the blur of city lights streak across the tinted windows like brushstrokes on black canvas. Her assistant had offered to accompany her that evening, but she'd declined. Some moments, especially the ones that cut just beneath the skin, are meant to be held alone. She wasn't humiliated. That would have required her to feel surprised. She wasn't even angry, not in the explosive, immediate sense. What she felt instead was more complex, something heavy but contained, a slow-moving realization that after all these years, Savannah, Crane still hadn't changed, still mistaking cleverness for insight, still drawing power from performance rather than substance, still laughing too easily at people she believed were beneath her, and what gnawed at Celeste more than Savannah's words was the room's laughter. That echo of agreement, small but sharp, cut deeper than the toast itself. Because it proved something Celeste had long suspected, the world still responded faster to bold mediocrity than to quiet excellence. The illusion of charisma still won over the truth of character. As the car slowed in front of her apartment building, Celeste let her hand rest on the door handle but didn't move. Instead, she sat for a moment, staring ahead. She thought of her mother, how she used to come home from cleaning offices late at night, smelling of bleach and wind, never asking for recognition. Some people build legacy in silence, she once told Celeste. Noise fades, work remains. Celeste had always lived by that. She never sought applause because she was building permanence, foundations, systems that didn't need her face to survive. But tonight, something shifted. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about visibility, not for her, but for every person who had ever been written out of their own story. Every thinker passed over for being too quiet. Every builder credited only after the fact. Every woman called mysterious as a way to diminish her presence. The contract was signed. The company was hers. But now, she realized, this moment could mean more than a strategic acquisition. It could be something else entirely. A reclamation. Not of pride. Not of attention. But of authorship. Because if Savannah wanted to play the face of change, Celeste would become the force behind it. She would reshape the narrative from the inside out. Quietly. Deliberately. Unmistakably. As she stepped out of the car, the city's cold night air wrapped around her like resolve. She pulled her coat tighter, not against the wind, but against the old impulse to stay invisible. Let them keep laughing, she thought. Soon enough, they'd realize who had written the script. The days after the gala passed, not in silence, but in strategy. Celeste returned to her office, a minimalist space high above Midtown, all glass and soft concrete, intentionally void of personal decoration. It wasn't designed to impress. It was built for clarity, for thought, for power that didn't ask, to be recognized. And in that stillness, she began her work, not just as owner, but as architect. She called no press conferences. She issued no internal memos that mentioned Savannah by name. Instead, she met with division heads, reviewed internal audits, and studied the tone and substance of every platform Clarity Media Group had touched. She examined not only what they published, but how they framed stories, who they centered, who they ignored, which voices were elevated and which were treated like accessories to someone else's, quote. She didn't move to destroy what Savannah had built. She moved to reframe it. Her leadership philosophy was simple. Amplify truth, not ego. Her first initiative was an overhaul of Clarity's editorial mission, shifting the focus from celebrity-driven commentary to ground-level reporting, community literacy spotlights, and access to education partnerships that redirected profits to underserved regions. Contracts were restructured, internal roles were reevaluated. People who had long felt unheard suddenly found their ideas at the center of strategy meetings. But this shift wasn't just philosophical, it was deeply personal. Because while the public still saw Savannah as the network's face, inside the system, Celeste was becoming the mind behind every decision. Each morning, before sunrise, she reviewed proposals with her legal team, negotiated deals with international nonprofits, and aligned corporate partnerships with measurable social impact metrics. She wasn't just running a company, she was shaping a cultural vehicle that could move influence with precision, and people began to notice, not with headlines, but with whispers. At first, Savannah didn't understand what was happening. Her show was still airing, her name still attached to press releases, but decisions were suddenly going through a new set of approvals. Topics she once chose herself were now being suggested by the editorial board. Guest bookings were redirected. Scripts were edited before they reached her hands. She chalked it up to restructuring. Normal growing pains. Until one afternoon, during what was supposed to be a simple budget sign-off meeting, she walked into a conference room to find Celeste sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Clarity's legal counsel and new board liaison. Savannah blinked, caught in that frozen split second where confidence misfires. "You're here," she said. Celeste looked up calmly, her tone smooth and professional. "Yes. I oversee all media development. Operations now?" There was no triumph in her voice, no gloating, just fact. Savannah's expression twitched, as if trying to catch up with the moment. "Since when?" Celeste closed the folder in front of her with quiet precision. "Since before your last gala." Toast! It wasn't cruel, it was controlled. That meeting was short, efficient, and unforgettable. Celeste didn't need to humiliate Savannah. She didn't need to raise her voice or list receipts. She simply existed in the room where decisions were made, a presence that could no longer be dismissed, overlooked, or reduced to silence. Outside that glass room, the city went on as usual. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. Savannah left with her contract intact, her platform still technically hers, but the illusion of control was gone. And Celeste? Celeste went back to work, not to win a rivalry, but to prove, to herself, more than anyone, that the best revenge isn't in taking someone else's place. It's in building your own and making it unshakable. The true turning point wasn't the boardroom meeting. It wasn't even Savannah's slow realization that her influence within the company had begun to erode. The real twist came weeks later, and like most of Celeste Moreau's moves, it unfolded with quiet precision. Subtle to the untrained eye, devastating to those who had underestimated her. It started with an internal memo sent from the strategy division, an announcement that Clarity Media Group would be restructuring its flagship initiatives under a new social impact model, one that would integrate direct education partnerships across Southeast Asia and West Africa. The memo named the architect of the model, a nonprofit incubator based in Singapore, one Savannah had never heard of, called Lavenir Literacy Labs. Curious, she searched the name, half out of boredom, half out of suspicion. What she found first was a sleek but minimal website, no flashy branding, no celebrity ambassadors, just a clear mission, impact reports, and testimonials from real students, educators, and community organizers. It was real, meaningful, effective, and entirely unfamiliar to her world. Then came the detail she didn't expect. At the bottom of the About page, in a small font barely visible against the site's soft gray footer, was a single name. Founder. Celeste Moreau. Savannah froze, scrolling back up as if expecting the words to change, but they remained. Clear. Inevitable. She closed the browser, opened it again, checked the domain registry. The connections were unmistakable. Lavenir was not a third-party partner. It was part of a network of entities wholly owned and controlled under Moreau Impact Holdings, the same firm that had quietly acquired Clarity Media Group just months before. And Savannah? She had spent the past several weeks publicly representing a literacy campaign designed by the same woman she'd ridiculed at her own gala. There was no press coverage of the acquisition, no headline declaring the takeover. Celeste had deliberately avoided spectacle. But the infrastructure, the influence, the framework of Clarity's future, it was all hers. For Savannah, it was a revelation that didn't come with drama or confrontation. There was no fiery exchange, no forced apology. Just the realization that every decision that had been confusing her lately, the restructured content guidelines, the unexpected editorial shifts, the subtle redirecting of focus from brand to substance, had been part of Celeste's design all along. What stung most wasn't that Celeste had bested her. It was that she had done it without needing to be seen doing it. Savannah had spent her entire career crafting visibility. Every step, every speech, every spotlight had been intentional. But she had never learned to see the kind of power that didn't seek permission, the kind that didn't ask for a microphone. Celeste had sat through her public humiliation in silence, not because she was weak, but because she was already ahead. Not emotionally, but structurally, strategically, irreversibly. By the end of the month, Clarity's internal leadership brief formally named Celeste as Chief Vision Officer, a role that clarified what had already become reality. Savannah remained as an on-air contributor, but the weight of her words no longer shaped the company's direction. The silence from her end was noticeable. No more veiled jabs on social media, no more behind-the-scenes posturing, just a recalibration, a quiet retreat. And Celeste? She didn't celebrate. She didn't retaliate. She simply released Clarity's new campaign, headlined not by a personality, but by the data. The impact, the lives reached, the languages supported, the classrooms built. It was, by all accounts, a masterstroke of poetic justice. Not the loud kind, not the cinematic kind, but the kind that makes people rethink everything they thought. They knew about what power looks like. Because Celeste hadn't just bought the company. She had rewritten the script, and this time, every word had her name behind it. The confrontation, if one could even call it that, didn't unfold in front of cameras or over a dramatic office standoff. It came on an unusually quiet afternoon, tucked inside the private lounge of a boutique publishing summit in Vancouver. The event was invitation only, intimate, discreet, high level. The kind of gathering where power was exchanged through glances and quiet agreements, not press releases. Celeste was already seated when Savannah arrived. She spotted her from across the room, Celeste in a slate gray pantsuit, posture perfect, engaged in a conversation with an investor from Oslo and a literacy advocate from Nairobi. No entourage, no theatrics, just presence. Their eyes met only. Once, a flicker across the clinking of glasses and the low hum of industry small talk. And then, as if guided by something more than instinct, Savannah made her way toward her. "May I?" she asked, motioning to the empty chair beside Celeste. Celeste gave a polite nod. "Of course." There was a pause, measured, not awkward. The kind of silence that held history. "I suppose I owe you something," Savannah said, her voice a shade lower than usual. Celeste glanced at her, calm, unreadable. "You don't owe me anything," Savannah smiled tightly. "That's generous, but not true." She looked down at the linen napkin in her lap, fingers tracing its corner. "I said things that night I thought were clever. I didn't realize I was mocking the architect of the very platform I was standing on." Celeste didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Savannah continued, her words slightly faster now. "I've built a career around being visible. Loud, if I'm honest. It worked. It still works, but I see now how that room laughed for the wrong reasons, and I know what I sounded like. This time Celeste spoke. You sounded like someone who assumed the room belonged to her. It wasn't a jab. It was a statement. Soft, firm, exact. Savannah nodded, accepting the weight of it. I did, and I realize now that rooms don't always belong to the loudest voice. Sometimes they belong to the person who built them without needing the spotlight. The moment could have turned sentimental, could have slipped into apology and absolution, but Celeste, ever intentional, redirected it. Visibility has its place, she said evenly, but influence, real influence, rarely announces itself. There was a stillness between them then, not hostile, not forgiving, just honest. Savannah leaned back slightly. I won't pretend this isn't difficult for me, but I respect what you've done, what you're doing. You've changed the direction of something I thought I understood. Celeste inclined her head once, subtly. That was the goal. There was no handshake, no dramatic closure, just two women sitting across from one another, finally seeing things clearly, one with the understanding that her words had consequences, and the other with the grace to let justice settle in silence. When Savannah left the lounge, she did so with quieter steps. Celeste, meanwhile, turned back to her notes. She had another meeting in 20 minutes with a publisher from Mumbai and an NGO leader from Accra. Work to do. Futures to shape. She didn't replay the conversation. She didn't savor it. She filed it away, not as vindication, but as validation. Because the greatest power is not in winning loudly, but in standing quietly at the center of everything others once thought you could never touch. And sometimes the real confrontation isn't about raising your voice. It's about having already made the decisions that leave nothing more to say. Celeste never told anyone about the conversation in Vancouver. She didn't need to. It wasn't a story for press cycles or corporate PR. It was a quiet chapter in a larger arc of transformation, one that didn't require a spotlight to have meaning. In the months that followed, she remained, as always, steady behind the scenes. Her vision for Clarity Media Group continued to evolve, deepening its partnerships with global literacy programs and shifting media narratives from surface appeal to structural impact. But those closest to the movement began to notice something else, something subtler than any announcement. There was a new tone across Clarity's content. Less polished performance, more lived perspective, more emphasis on listening rather than leading. Stories of single mothers running underground libraries in Lagos, girls in rural Cambodia designing solar-powered book carts, elders teaching indigenous dialects through oral history podcasts. These weren't token highlights. They were the new backbone of the brand. The network was changing, not into something Celeste wanted to be seen owning, but into something she was proud to quietly shape. One morning, nearly 6 months after the gala, an editor from a prominent journalism review published a feature titled The Invisible Architect: How One Woman Rewrote Media from the Inside. Traced the anonymous influence behind Clarity's new global direction, and concluded, in a tone more curious than reverent, that Celeste Moreau may be the most quietly radical figure in modern media today. She didn't comment. The truth was, Celeste never needed the world to know she'd been underestimated. She never needed revenge to look like spectacle. What she had needed, and finally created, was space. A space where others like her could lead without apology, where girls told they were too soft-spoken, too serious, too slow to self-promote, could look up and see themselves not just represented, but centered. Justice, to her, had never been about Savannah, or that night, or even the industry. Justice was about restoring balance to a world tilted too long in favor of performance over principle. And she had done that not by tearing down the system, but by quietly rerouting its power lines. One afternoon, as she reviewed reports from their literacy labs in Dakar, Her assistant asked her what she wanted to do about a media inquiry, another outlet hoping to interview her about her quiet conquest of the corporate world. Celeste smiled faintly, shaking her head. Tell them the work speaks for itself. Then, she looked out the window of her office, where the city pulsed below like a living map of every story still untold. She thought of her mother, her grandfather, the girl she used to be. She thought of the room that had once laughed at her silence, and she thought, with a clarity that no headline could offer, there is power in restraint, there is poetry in precision, and there is victory in creating something that doesn't just outshine your critics, it outlasts them. What happened in this story isn't just a personal victory, it's a case study in power dynamics, gendered assumptions, and the evolution of leadership in the 21st century. Celeste Moreau's journey highlights a critical truth often overlooked in modern media. Impact does not require attention, and real influence doesn't beg to be seen. We're living in a time where visibility is often mistaken for value. But this story reminds us that the most profound shifts, the kind that truly change systems, often begin with people who choose depth over display. Celeste didn't just win. She redefined what winning looks like. She chose restraint over revenge, vision over validation, and in doing so, made space for others who've been underestimated simply for being quiet, intentional, or different. It's a reminder to watch not just who's speaking, but who's building, and to ask ourselves, not who's in the spotlight, but who designed the stage. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated because of how you carry your strength? Let us know your story in the comments below. Your voice could be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and we'd love to have you with us.